Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Daf Yomi. As always, we've got our amazing live studio audience over here on Zoom, and we are ready to go. We are going to be doing Daf Yud Daled of Maseches Yoma today, page 14. Already 2 weeks in. The time is just flying. We're going to get the text up on the screen over here. And we'll get ourselves underway. We're going to be talking about a little bit about how the Kohen Gadol prepares during the 7 days of separation that he has to go through before Yom Kippur. We're going to be revisiting the red heifer. We're also going to be talking about the order of the daily avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. And that's all packed into what's otherwise quite a short daf. We're going to be starting actually a few lines down on page 14 with a new Mishnah. So can you believe it? For 2 weeks we've been learning Maseches Yoma already, or a little under 2 weeks, and we're only now getting to our next Mishnah of the Masechta. So let's get this underway. Says the Mishnah. Kol Shivas Hayamim, for all of the 7 days that the Kohen Gadol is being quarantined before he goes into doing the Yom Kippur service, who Zorek Es Hadam. So each of these 7 days he is going to sprinkle the blood of the Korban Tamid, Umaktir Es HaKatores, and he is going to burn the incense, Umetiv Es Haneros, and he is going to prepare the candles of the menorah. He's going to take away the ashes. He's going to prepare the new wicks. Umakrib es harosh v'es haregel, and he is going to offer up the head and the leg of the korban tamid. The korban tamid, of course, was was brought every single day. Ushar kol hayamim, with regards to the rest of the days of the year, in ratza lahakriv makriv, the Kohen Gadol does actually have the first right of refusal to offer up the Korban Tamid. Shekohen Gadol makriv chelek barosh v'notel chelek barosh, because the Kohen Gadol can sacrifice. Well, that basically means that he has the right of first refusal. He can sacrifice any portion that he chooses first, and he's entitled to take any portion of a korban that is designated for kohanim to be eaten. The Kohen Gadol has the right to jump ahead in the queue and to take those items. Asks the Gemara though, Man Tana. The Gemara asks, who is the author of this Mishnah? Who is the Tana who is behind these halachas in the Mishnah? So Amar Rav Chisda starts us off and says, Rav Chisda says, Delok Rabbi Akiva, I can tell you this, it's not like Rabbi Akiva. De'i Rabbi Akiva, because if we were to say that this Mishnah was in accordance with Rabbi Akiva, that creates a problem for us, because he says, Ha'amar tahor shenafla alav hazar tamesa. Are we going to read that word? Tim ator. Heichi avid avodah. Okay, so here we need to take a little step back and talk about the water of the para aduma. The para aduma is the red heifer, which would have been burnt up entirely, and the ashes of the para aduma would be mixed with water, and then that mixture would be sprinkled on people who needed to be purified. If they were contaminated with tumah, so they would have to have the water of the para aduma sprinkled on them to be able to help them along their purification process. Now, here's the thing. The Kohen Gadol, I believe, would be sprinkled each day before Yom Kippur. For the 7 days before Yom Kippur, he would be sprinkled with the water of the Para Aduma. Now, that's all well and good. But here's the problem. Rabbi Akiva says that if you were to sprinkle someone who is tahor, someone who is pure, so their status is now going to be that they become impure. So for Rabbi Akiva, this is going to be a problem. Because we've said that for each of the 7 days, the Kohen Gadol is going to be sprinkling blood, he's going to be offering sacrifices, he's going to be doing the candles. Okay, but for Rabbi Akiva, that should have alarm bells ringing, because if any of this water was to fall on a tahor person, like a Kohen Gadol, he is going to become tamei. And if he is tamei, heichi avid avoda. How is he supposed to perform these services in the Beis Hamikdash? So that is why Rav Chisda says our Mishnah can't be authored by Rabbi Akiva, because otherwise there's an inconsistency. We're going to show the source for Rabbi Akiva's opinion now. The Tanya, as it says in the Baraisa, the Hiza hatahor al hatamei, that the tahor person is going to sprinkle on the tamei person. So Rabbi Akiva says, ala tamei tahor, ala tahor tamei, divrei Rabbi Akiva. What this verse indicates is that if a person is tahor, they're going to be contaminating they're going to become impure. And if a person was tamei, then they are going to become tahor. So that is Rabbi Akiva's opinion. That's not universally shared, though, as we see. But Chachamim say, Ein hadvarim halalu amurim ela bidvarim hamakablim tuma. The rabbis say that what we are saying over here is that statuses can change. It's only if it ends up in the right place. It's only if the water goes onto something that is susceptible to becoming impure. But if not, then it's not going to make a person impure. That's the Chachamim's opinion. So the Gemara asks, Maihi, what is the halachic implication of that statement? And it quotes a Mishnah, Kiditnan. Niskavein lahazos ala bahema v'hiza ala adam. If your kavana was to sprinkle the water on an animal, which can't become tuma in its lifetime. So if your kavana was to sprinkle the water on an animal, which you weren't supposed to do, it's not going to become impure in its lifetime. V'hiza al adam. But then what happened was that the water ended up on a person. Im yesh be'ezov yishaneh. If there's any water left on the hyssop branch that you're using to sprinkle the water with, then he should repeat the action and sprinkle the water in the right place on the person. If your intention was to sprinkle a person who can become contaminated with tumah in their lifetime, so if you were intending to sprinkle this water on a person, v'hiza ala behema, and then what ended up happening was you sprinkle the water on an animal, im yesh be'ezov lo yishaneh. If water remains on the hyssop branch, you can't repeat the action, and that's because the water is going to be disqualified on account of the fact that it ended up on an animal. My time at Rabbi Akiva. What is the reason for Rabbi Akiva's opinion that the status is going to change which way? Nichtov rachamana, because he says he interprets the verse as follows: V'hizah tahor alav. When the verse says that the tahor person is going to sprinkle on him. No, let me try that one again. Rabbi Akiva says maybe the verse should have said that v'hizah tahor alav, that the water is going to be sprinkled by the pure person on him. But that's not what the verse in the Torah says. The verse says v'hizah tahor al hatamei. So Rabbi Akiva asks, "My al hatamei, why did the Torah need to say that it's going to be sprinkled on the tamei person? Surely that should be intuitive. It should be obvious." Shma mina. So Rabbi Akiva learns from this little nuance in the verse, al hatamei tahor al tahor tamei, that if the poor person, let's try that one again. If the pure person sprinkles it, he is going to become impure, and if an impure person receives this water, he is going to become pure. So that's how Rabbi Akiva learns this particular verse. But then we have to ask as follows: Rabbanan, how do the rabbis learn this verse then? Why don't they come to the same conclusion as Rabbi Akiva? They instead learn, this verse is coming to teach us that the sprinkling is going to be valid if it is sprinkled onto something that can contract tumah. A person can contract tumah. An animal cannot contract tumah, not during their lifetime anyway. So the verse is talking about water being sprinkled on something which is capable of becoming tumah. And it doesn't indicate that a pure person is going to become impure from this sprinkling. Aval hacha, however, over here, with regards to with sprinkling water on a pure person, kal v'chomeru. The rabbis learn that it's a kal v'chomer that keeps their status in check. Im hal hatamei tahor, if the water purifies someone who is impure, al hatahor lo kol shekain, then if the water is sprinkled onto a pure person, should they not remain pure by logical extension? Whereas Rabbi Akiva says, no, if a person was tahor when the water was sprinkled on them, it's going to make them impure. So that's the Rabbanon's take on this verse, that only a tamei person is going to become pure from this water, but a pure person is not going to become contaminated if the water is sprinkled on them. But now we say, Rabbi Akiva, what about you, sir? Why do you not learn the same way as the Chachamim? Why do you have this unique position? To which the Gemara says, Hainu de Ka'amar Shlomo, Rabbi Akiva has his opinion because of the words of King Shlomo, of King Solomon in Koheles, where King Solomon says, Amarti achakma v'hi rechoka mimeni, the verse in Koheles which says, I said I would become wise, but it eludes me. So what is the wisdom that eludes King Solomon? According to Rabbi Akiva, it's referring to the water of the Para Aduma, which seems to work in a very contradictory way. So that is the wisdom that eludes King Solomon, and that's because Rabbi Akiva holds that the pure person would become impure, and the impure person would become pure. So that is the wisdom, the contradiction that even eluded King Solomon, and it eludes us as well. V'Rabbanan. So what about the rabbis? What are they going to say King Solomon is talking about? If he's not talking about Rabbi Akiva's halacha, what is King Solomon talking about in Koheles? So answers the Gemara, Hahu lemazeh v'lemazin alav tahor v'nogeya bahen tameh. The rabbis say that King Solomon would have been bewildered by the fact that the one who sprinkles the water and the one who gets sprinkled, they are going to be tahor, but anybody who would be touching this water would become impure. That's the halacha that seemed to bewilder, I should say, King Solomon. So we're going to explore this just a tiny bit over here. The Gemara asks, "My mazeh." No, am I in the right place? No, I'm not. Umazeh tahor, asks the Gemara, is the person who sprinkles the water actually going to be pure? V'haksiv, but it says in the pasuk, Umazeh mehanida yichabes begadav, that the person who sprinkles the water of the para aduma is going to have to wash his clothes. And if he's having to wash his clothes, that is because they require purification. So the Gemara answers, my mazeh, what is the meaning of the word in the verse mazeh, the one who sprinkles? Answers the Gemara, nogeya. It refers to the person who touches the water. Vahaksiv mazeh, but our verse says mazeh, vahaksiv nogeya. And it also talks about a person who touches the water. If we have a look at the whole verse, it's going to be a chok, a mitzvah that we're just unable to understand. The person who sprinkles the water is going to have to wash his clothes. And a person who touches the water is going to be impure until the evening. So the fact that the verse mentions a mazeh, it mentions a sprinkler, and it also mentions a nogeya. That is a problem because it means that the mazeh, the sprinkler, can't be referring to a person who touches because the verse talks about someone who touches. Va'od mazeh by kibbutz begadim. Furthermore, a person who sprinkles has to wash their clothes. Nogeya lo by kibbutz begadim. But a person who touches the water is not instructed to wash their clothes. So we must be talking about two different types of people and two different types of ways of being contaminated. Elamai mazeh. So rather, the Gemara asks, what are we talking about when we talk about a mazeh? The Gemara answers, it's a noseh. It's a person who carries the water. A person who carries the water is going to be, their clothes are going to be contaminated and they're going to have to wash them. And a person who touches the water is going to become impure. So now the Gemara asks, though, V'nichtov Rachmana lo say, let the verse explicitly call it a person who carries the water, but it didn't. It called it a person who sprinkles. So why does the Gemara not call it a noseh, a person who carries this water? My time aksiv mazeh. Why does the verse call it a mazeh? Hakamash melan deba'inon shiur haza'ah. So what this comes to teach us is that in order to become impure from carrying the water, it must reach a requisite threshold. You must be carrying a certain amount to be able to become tameh, or for your clothes to require washing from carrying. From carrying this water, it has to be a certain amount. And it has to be the amount that is needed for sprinklings. The Gemara says, this is going to work according to the opinion who says that there's a required minimum amount of water for sprinkling water. There's a minimum measure to be able to sprinkle water. That's going to make sense then, because if you hold that you need a minimum amount of water, then that halacha makes sense. But according to the opinion who says that you don't need a minimum measure of water to be able to do sprinkling, what would they say with regards to this verse? With regards to this verse saying mazeh instead of nogeya, right? The whole point of the verse saying mazeh is to indicate to us that that you have to be touching the right amount of water. That only works if that's your opinion, that there is a minimum amount for sprinkling. So if you don't hold that there's a minimum measurement for sprinkling, how are you going to understand this verse? So the Gemara answers, even according to the opinion that says that you don't need to have a minimum measurement for sprinkling, hanimile agaba de gavra. That's only going to apply to water that has to be sprinkled on the back of an impure person, and for that you can have any amount of water. Aval b'mana, but if you are dipping the hyssop branch into the water of the para aduma to be able to do the sprinkling, then sricha shiur. For the actual bowl or basin or whatever it is that you are carrying this water in, there has to be a certain amount of water in there. But to do the actual process, you don't need to have a specific amount on the branch to actually sprinkle the water. Titnan, as it says in the Mishnah, Kama yehei bahen vehei kadei hazar. How much do you have to have in the vessel, in the bowl, to be able to sprinkle? And the Gemara answers, kadei sheyitbol, as we turn the page, kadei sheyitbol rashe givolin veyazeh. You have to have enough water to be able to dip the branch of the hyssop, or to be able to put the buds of the hyssop and to have that collect some water. There has to be enough water in the bowl to be able to have enough on the branch to be able to sprinkle. To this, Abaye says, Afilu tema Rabbi Akiva. 1 second, we missed a step. Right. So if we are saying that, then what impact does that have on everything that we've been saying so far? Let's try to follow where that's all got us now. So what was it? So I think where we're at the moment is we're saying so far that our Mishnah can't be in accordance with Rabbi Akiva, and then we sidetrack to talk about all of this sprinkling. But fundamentally, the point remains that that Rabbi Akiva could not be the author of our Mishnah, and we said that that's because Rabbi Akiva holds that the status is going to change. The Kohen Gadol is going to become impure if the water touches him. So he can't be doing the service for 7 days before Yom Kippur if the water is touching him. So it can't be Rabbi Akiva's opinion. So Abaye says, enter Abaye. Abaye says, Afilu Tema Rabbi Akiva. You could even say that our Mishnah is authored by Rabbi Akiva. But the Avid Avoda Kula Yoma, but the Kohen Gadol would work for a whole day. He would perform his temple service for the day. Velifnia, am I reading that word right? Ulafanya Madu Ale, Vitavel Va'avid Herev Shemesh. But what would happen is he would perform his temple service in the day. So he would do all of these things that he was expected to do. He would prepare the candles. He would offer up the head and the leg of the Korban Tamid. He would, what else did we say he was going to do? We said that he was going to sprinkle the blood. He was going to offer up the ketores, the incense. So he will do all of that. But towards the evening, he will get sprinkled with the para aduma water. He will become impure, but then he'll go straight to the mikvah. Va'avid herev havshemesh, and then he would wait for sunset, and at which point he would become pure, and then the process starts again the following day. So we could even say that the Mishnah is in accordance with Rabbi Akiva. So I think if I'm not mistaken, we are a little bit unresolved as to who the author of the Mishnah could be. It could be Rabbi Akiva, and I'm getting it could well be actually that that point of unresolution is actually our point of resolution. The fact that we don't come in with any more contradictions to that, perhaps the Gemara leaves it off that the author is actually Rabbi Akiva, and it can still work because he can work for a whole day. He can become contaminated at the end of the day, and then he'll go to the mikveh and he'll be pure again, and he'll repeat that process for 7 days leading up to Yom Kippur. I'll do my best. I think he has a mikveh near to his chamber, and if it's not near to his chamber, he has access to a mikveh that can that he can bypass. I think there was either the mikveh was near to him, or he was in a chamber which had like passages that ran under the base of mikdash, which he could get to a mikveh. He could access a mikveh without crossing any problematic territory. So there was definitely a way. I recall learning at some point that there was this whole network of subterranean tunnels that he could access to be able to move around. The base of English was quite a cool place. I mean, there was, it's a shame that we can't cool and bloody. Okay, let's continue with the next part of our Gemara. Now we're at 2 dots, 3 lines down on your Daladam and base, and we are quoting now from our Mishnah. Umaktir es hakatores umetiv es haneros. So we're now going to focus on the katores and the candles, preparing the menorah. So the Gemara asks, Alma katores bereisha v'hadaneros. So the fact that our Mishnah mentions Ketores incense first and then the candles of the menorah, that would lead us to conclude that the first part of the process was dealing with the incense, and then you would go and deal with the wicks. Now this is problematic. Why is this problematic? Because the Gemara tells us, Urminhu, this is problematic. Misha Zachar Badishon Mizbeach HaPnimi Umisha Zacha b'menorah, Umisha Zacha B'Ktores. We have another source in Maseches Tamid, a Mishnah which says that there was going to be a person who was privileged to perform the removal of the ashes from the inner altar, and then there would be a person who was privileged to remove the ashes from the menorah, and then there was a person who was privileged to burn the incense. And according to this Mishnah, the removal of ashes from the menorah is occurring before the process of the ketores. So that contradicts the order as it appears in our Mishnah. So Amar Rav Huna says, Man Tana Tamid, who is the author of the Mishnah in Maseches Tamid? And the Gemara answers, Rabbi Shimon Ish HaMitzpahi. Who? It is none other than Rabbi Shimon from Mitzpah, if that is indeed a place name. Either way, Ish HaMitzpah. That's his name, Rabbi Shimon Ish HaMitzpah. He is the author of the Mishnah in Maseches Tamid, and he is not the author of the Mishnah in Maseches Yoma. Though, says the Gemara, didn't we learn the opposite in relation to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon Ish HaMitzpah? It's none, as it says in Maseches Tamid. Balo lekeren mizrachis tzfonis. When it comes to the sprinkling of the blood of the korban tamid on the altar, it says Balo lekeren mizrachis tzfonis, that the kohen is going to come to the northeastern corner of the mizbeach, nosen mizrachat safona ma'arabis, and he is then going to sprinkle the. No, let me try that one again. He comes to the northeastern corner, and then nosen. Am I reading this right? No. He comes to the northeastern corner, and then nosen. Yes, I am reading this wrong. Got it. Figured it out, guys. Oh no, I was just okay. Let's try this one again. Mizrachat Safonis, no saying Mizrachat Safona. He comes to the northeastern corner and he sprinkles the blood. He applies the blood on the northeastern corner. Maravis de Romis, then he goes to the southwestern corner, no saying Marava, Va'achar Kach, no saying de Roma. He sprinkles first on the western side of the Mizbeach, and afterwards he sprinkles on the southern side of the Mizbeach. Am I reading in the right place here? No, sorry guys, let's go again. I scooted a few lines down. We see the opposite in this Mishnah. He comes to the northeastern corner. No say Mizracha Safona. He then sprinkles on the northeastern corner. Maravis de Romis. Then he comes to the southwestern corner. No say Marava de Roma, and he sprinkles on the southwestern corner. That is, it would appear, the unnamed statement of the Mishnah, the Tanakama. But then we see the Tani Allah, and then we see in that very Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon Ish HaMitzpah, that Rabbi Shimon comes along and Meshane B'Tamid, and he teaches in this Mishnah, right? And he changes the way in which it's done, and he says Mizrachis Tzafonis, no say Mizrachis Tzafona, that he goes to the northeastern corner and he sprinkles in the northeastern corner, but then Maravis Daromis, he goes to the southwestern corner and no say Marava, Va'achakach no say Daroma, that he sprinkles on the western side and then he sprinkles on the southern side. So he is not saying that you only sprinkle twice, once in those two corners. He says the Kohen would sprinkle in the corner on one side, but then he would do two sprinklings on the other side. So there we're seeing that Rabbi Shimon HaMitzpah is clearly not the default position. The fact that he argues on the Mishnah in Maseches Tamid means that he can't be our unnamed default author in Maseches Tamid. And what we were trying to say before is that in the absence of telling us who the person might be that is speaking, we will always assume that it's Rabbi Shimon Ish HaMitzpah. But it can't be, because he presents machlokes elsewhere in Maseches Tamid. So that's our problem. So we can't say that our Mishnah is sorry, we could still say that our Mishnah is Shimon Ish HaMitzvah because he's clearly not authoring the Mishnah in Maseches Tamid, which flipped the order. I hope that's clear. Ela Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yochanan says, Man Tana Seder Yoma, who is the author of the Mishnayos in Maseches Yoma, in our Masechta here. If we are not told who a particular voice is, who could we assume is the default author? So Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi Shimon Ish HaMitzvah hu, that it's Rabbi Shimon Ish HaMitzvah, which means that Rabbi Shimon Ish HaMitzvah could be saying in our Masechta that Ketores comes before the candles, comes before the wicks of the menorah. Varami Seder Yoma are Seder Yoma. But now we're going to have a separate problem because we're going to have a contradiction between a Mishnah in Yoma and another Mishnah in Yoma. Ditnan, because it says later in the Masechta on page Kafeh 25, we'll get to that in a week and a half. Pais Hasheni, the second lottery. We'll see as we progress through this that in order to allocate roles to the Kohanim, they did this by way of a raffle. So the second raffle that we'll come to in due course, that would determine mi shochet, who slaughters the Korban Tamid, mi zorek, who's going to sprinkle the blood of the Korban Tamid, mi medashen mizbeach hapnimi, who's going to remove the ashes of the inner altar, umi medashen es menorah, who's going to remove the ashes of the menorah, umi male evarim lakeves, who's going to take up the limbs of the tamid to the ramp where they will be burnt later. So that's the second lottery. That's the second raffle. And Pais Hashlishi. What's the third lottery going to determine? That is going to determine Chadashim Liktores Bova Fisu. That is going to be a lottery for all of the new Kohanim to come and see who is going to do the mitzvah of the Ketores. Now, if that's the third lottery, what does that tell us, guys? That it's coming after the removal of the ashes from the menorah. Right? Does that make sense? Our Mishnah is saying that you have to do the Ketores and then you have to do the candles. Right? We brought one proof from Maseches Tamid which switched the order, and now we're bringing a Mishnah from Maseches Yoma which switches the order, because there were two raffles. The earlier raffle would determine who is going to take away the ashes from the menorah, and then this next raffle is going to determine who is doing the Ketores. Now, the amazing thing about the Ketores, just by the by, it required a separate lottery, because if you had ever done the Ketores, you weren't allowed to do it again. And that's because there was a guarantee that if you performed the Ketores procedure, you would be guaranteed to come across a good sizable amount of money at some point in your life. It was a guarantee for wealth. So a Kohen could only be given that mitzvah once. So they would bring in any Kohen that hadn't yet done the Ketores procedure, and they would go into this raffle, into this lottery for that. So that's a bit of a side point, but the point that we're trying to make is that the fact that there's a third raffle coming after the other raffle, which is for the Ketores, clearly the order must be that the candles get dealt with first, and then the Ketores, right? And our Mishnah was saying that you do the Ketores and then you do the candles. So Amar Abaye, Lo Kashya. Abaye says this does not have to be a contradiction, because the procedure of taking care of the wicks in the menorah was done in two stages. Kan b'hatavas shtei neiros, kan b'hatavas chamesh neiros. First of all, the Kohen would clean out 5 of the candles. Then there would be another mitzvah, another part of the service that would be performed, and then they would come and get the other 2 candles ready. So the fact that the procedure was split means that we can say the following. In our Mishnah, when we say that you do the Ketores and then you do the candles, That's because it's talking about the last two candles, which would come after Ketores. But in the Mishnayot in Maseches Tamid, and with regards to the raffle, that's talking about the 5 wicks, which would be dealt with before the Ketores. So that's how Abaye answers the contradiction. Says the Gemara, Lemema de Ketores mafsik lahu. Does this mean that Ketores, that the incense procedure is separating and interrupting the menorah? Abaye, but hang on a minute, Abaye. It's not Ketores that interrupts the wicks. Ha'abaye Masade Maracha Mishmei de Gemara. Elsewhere, we're going to see a bit later on page 33, Daf Lamed Gimel, that Abaye doesn't have Ketores interrupting the wicks. Uvadam hatamid mafsik lahu. When Abaye talks about the order of the daily service in the Beis Hamikdash, right? He doesn't say that they were doing the Ketores in between the wicks. He says that they were sprinkling the blood in between the wicks. So clearly, then that can't be the answer, Abaye. So answers the Gemara, Amri lo kasha. That's not a contradiction either. Hahi la'Abba Shaul, v'ha l'Rabbanan. The sequence that Abaye quotes is in accordance with Abba Shaul. So Abba Shaul would say that you first do the 5 wicks, then you sprinkle the blood, then you do the 2 wicks, and then you do Ketores. But ha l'Rabbanan. But the other opinion is the rabbis. And the rabbis say that you sprinkle the blood, then you do the 5 candles, then you do the Ketores, and then you do the other 2 candles. And so actually it doesn't have to be a contradiction. We're just saying that it goes in accordance with the Rabbanan. The Tanya, as it says in the Brisa, Lo yitav es neiros v'achar kach yaktir, ela yaktir v'achar kach yetiv. The rabbis say that you should not do the candles and then do the Ketores. Rather, you should have the Ketores and then finish preparing the wicks. And Abba Shaul says, Abba Shaul omer, meitiv v'achar kach maktir. You should prepare the candles, and afterwards you should then do the Ketores. So there is now going to be an understanding of why Abba Shaul has his opinion and why the Rabbanan have their opinion. But for that, guys, you're going to have to do tomorrow's daf, because that's all we're going to do for today. So thank you to everyone watching on YouTube, the millions watching on YouTube. Thank you for joining us this morning. We'll see you again next week on Daf Yomi. But in the meantime, have a wonderful